A man in his 60s slides a folder across a diner table and says a number out loud he's never said to anyone else. You have $70,000 saved, and a name nobody in this industry recognizes yet. By the time this story ends, you'll control 22 companies and roughly $500 million of other people's life work. Here's the thing almost nobody tells you before you start. The goal was never to accumulate cash. The goal is to accumulate control. And structured correctly, control can be acquired with almost no money at all. That single idea is the entire foundation of everything that follows. Level 1. $0 to $100,000. You're 29. You don't have capital. What you have is a spreadsheet of 600 small businesses pulled from public filings and broker listings, and a skill most people underestimate. You know how to read a business the way a mechanic listens to an engine. You find Gerald, 66, industrial cleaning supply business, 31 years in, exhausted, no succession plan. He doesn't need your money. He needs someone who won't gut what he built. You bring the skill. He brings the asset. The exchange is the deal itself. Sweat equity, a small earnout, and a seller note that lets the purchase price live on his balance sheet instead of yours. This is how the first controlling stake gets built without a war chest. When a seller carries the note, he wants you to succeed. His repayment depends on it. He'll take your calls at 9 at night, explaining which customer is difficult and which vendor relationship actually holds the margin together. That knowledge has real dollar value nobody puts on a term sheet. Your attorney, Paige, sets it up clean from day one. One holding entity, one operating entity underneath it, an operating agreement that spells out who decides what and what happens if someone wants out. It costs $2,400, not the small fortune people assume. She tells you something you'll repeat for the next 20 years. A clean cap table signals someone competent is running this. A messy one signals the opposite, no matter what the revenue says. You mix nothing, not one personal expense through the business account, not one undocumented loan. It feels unnecessarily rigid in year one. It's the only reason any of what comes later is possible. Level 2. $1 million to $20 million. The second acquisition teaches you more than the first, because now you have a reference point. You know what integration actually costs in time and attention. You know which systems break the moment a new entity tries to run through them. By the fourth acquisition, a regional HVAC company, then a pest control route, then a small commercial laundry, you stop being an operator and start being an allocator. You build what Paige calls the platform layer. One chart of accounts, one banker, Adrian, who can read across every entity and tell you within minutes where the cash actually sits. One HR framework, so the employee handbook doesn't contradict itself company to company. This layer isn't overhead. It's what makes every acquisition after it cheaper and safer than the one before. The mechanism nobody sees from outside is the real engine. You buy each business alone at 3 times its earnings, because at that size the price is tied to one tired owner's income. The instant 3 of them sit under the same roof, with shared bookkeeping and shared back office, the combined thing stops pricing like a small shop and starts pricing like a real company. The same dollar of profit that was worth 3 times alone is worth 6 or 7 times inside the platform. That gap has a name: multiple arbitrage. It's the closest thing to free money in the entire economy. And you didn't get smarter to find it. You just learned where the seam was. You also learned the ugly trick that keeps the machine fed. Once a business pays down its original note, you refinance it, pull fresh debt back out as a dividend to yourself, and you still own the entire company. A dividend recap. You get your original capital back, sometimes several times over, without ever selling a thing. The risk resets onto the business. The cash comes home to you. Then a roofing company you closed on in March loses its owner to a heart attack 6 weeks later, and the foreman quits the same week. You're awake at 3 a.m., doing math you've already run 100 times, hoping it lands differently. It doesn't, not for a while. You promote the dispatcher who actually knows how the place runs, and double her pay before she can think about leaving. It holds. Level 3, $50 million. Something shifts here that no spreadsheet announces in advance. The instincts that made you a good acquirer stop being sufficient to manage what you've built. Strategy above this size isn't primarily about finding the next deal anymore. It's deciding which business you already own deserves the next dollar of capital, and which one you're holding for reasons that have more to do with sentiment than math. Governance stops being a quarterly call and a spreadsheet. It becomes real board seats with people who've been inside a deal structure before and will tell you the thing you don't want to hear. Ring fencing, the separation that was just architecture at $20 million, becomes compliance at this size. Separate accounts, documented transactions between entities, no casual movement of money crossing a line without a paper trail, because a liability that starts in one company should have no path to the others. Institutional capital starts arriving differently. Senior lenders want audited financials and underwrite your entire structure, not just the businesses inside it. A firm's preferred equity partner, once the papers are signed, comes with board observer seats and return expectations that aren't negotiable anymore. What they're really asking is whether the thing they're trusting with money is governed at the level it claims to be. If it isn't, the capital either doesn't come, or it comes wrapped in control provisions that cost more than the interest rate suggests. You see Nolan at an industry event around this time. A guy who built something similar, but did it loud. New truck. A boat he mentions 400 times a year. A jacket clearly chosen to be noticed, standing near the bar describing his fund with phrases like, democratizing access to institutional-grade deals. Three people are half listening with the particular patience people use when they suspect someone's about to ask them for money. You're wearing a fleece from a clearance rack, and when someone asks what you do, you say, some acquisitions, nothing exciting. Technically true, almost entirely beside the point. Nobody asks you for anything that night. Level 4, $500 million. You're 47 now. 22 companies, filters, roofing, an HVAC operation, a commercial laundry, a regional plumbing outfit, none of them glamorous. All of them throwing off cash every single month. The equity across the whole structure is worth roughly $500 million on paper, and it looks nothing like what you imagined at 29, sitting across from Gerald in that diner. Private equity has noticed the same scene you noticed 2 decades ago. They're running your exact playbook now, just with billions instead of a wire from a savings account, paying multiples you can't match for the same boring businesses you used to buy for 3 times earnings. The water you fished alone for 20 years is full of much larger boats now. But you have one thing they structurally cannot offer. They run on a clock. A fund buys a platform, bolts on acquisitions for 5 to 7 years, then has to sell because its own investors were promised an exit. You promised no one an exit. You can hold forever. You can leave a 70-year-old founder's name on the door because you're never flipping the building to dress it up for the next buyer. So when a seller in his 60s slides a folder across a table now, you can say the one sentence no private equity buyer can say honestly, I won't gut this in 3 years to sell it. That sentence alone has won you deals that money couldn't. You make the largest acquisition of your career this year, and across the closing table sits a seller roughly your own age. You realize, somewhere in that meeting, that you've become the exact person you were quietly intimidated by at 32. Later, over a lunch he insists on paying for, Gerald, the man from the very first diner table, long retired now, finally tells you something he never said at your original closing. 2 other buyers looked at his business before you. Both offered more money and a faster close. He turned them both down, because both told him, in the polite language of the industry, that the first thing they'd do is replace his people and sell within 5 years. He didn't want to be flipped. He wanted 31 years to keep existing after his name came off the lease. There are 10,000 business owners aging out of their companies every single day in this country. Millions of these businesses will hit the market this decade, and roughly 4 out of 5 will never find a buyer at all. When they close, it isn't just a business that ends. It's 30 years of someone's foundation, gone with it. You didn't win because you were the smartest person in any of those rooms. You won because you were willing to promise the one thing almost nobody with real money is willing to promise, that you'd let the thing keep living. The folder from that very first diner is still in your files somewhere. And even now, At the top of a structure worth $500 million, you're not entirely sure the whole climb would have been possible if you'd been just a little less willing to keep your word. If you've ever wondered how the quiet people buying up ordinary businesses in your own town actually got their start, this was the map. The work, like always, is in the details.